Yes, memorising songs for a lot of beginner and intermediate guitarists can be quite difficult. A big problem is being able to play the song with the guitar tab in front of you, but then realising that you're not going to be able to perform it live unless you've got to employ somebody to turn them pages for you. So how do we overcome this? Well, there's a number of things that we can look at in this video that's going to help you be able to memorise any song. So the first thing that we're going to look at is chord progressions. Now this, for experienced guitarists, may be something that's blatantly obvious, but it's not blatantly obvious to everyone unless pointed out. So every song has a repeated chord progression. So if we looked at something like Sweet Child of Mine, we have D, C added 9, G, back to D. We then would go through that chord progression again, starting again on D, C added 9, back to G, back to D again. For all the verses, that is the chord progression which goes round in a circle. Now what you'll see if you buy the, say something like the little black book in the chords that are written out there, is we see the D, we see the C added 9, the G, and then the D. Now it doesn't write the D out again because we're still on D, so that's where sometimes we can look at the chord progression in a book and the repeated chord progression doesn't necessarily jump out, and it is surprising the amount of people who are getting quite good at guitar who don't realise that really that chord progression could be written on a lollipop stick, and there isn't a lot to memorise, and it saves. I know one friend who got into performing, like buskers nights, he had his iPad and he'd had to get a auto scroll app so that his guitar tab with the lyrics and the chords at the top would automatically scroll up so that he would always know what chord to be on. When he found that, he realised there was a repeated chord progression. It kind of saves that, but then it can free up and it makes you more confident in being able to play live. If we look at something a little bit more complicated than say strumming, say something like the verses on Smoke on the Water, which is played like this, which is on a G5, moving to F5 and back. So we would have this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to F, back to G, and that will be played for the verse 4 times. Now what you'll see in the guitar tab book is this. If you take a look at that, that repeated chord progression doesn't jump out and say hello to you. It looks like a whole bunch of G5 guitar tab with an intermittent F5 added in at a point where it doesn't seem to have any, you don't know when it's going to come in. Obviously you can listen to the record and work things out, but if you're looking at the guitar tab book, that simple chord progression, which is basically G5 played 5 times, 3, 4, 5, twice, and then we would start that again, play it again and again and again. So that's dealing with chord progressions. What will also help us with memorising songs is understanding keys and the chords within a key. Now I don't want to delve too deeply in this video in explaining that. I will make another video explaining how to work out keys. But if we take something like the key of D, the key of D has these chords within it, which is D, E minor, F sharp minor, G, A, B minor, and C sharp diminished. Now most songs are built on the 1st, the 4th and the 5th chord, and we see that in so many pop songs. And you might have heard of that phrase, the first, the fourth and the fifth. And we also have the minor chord, which is at the sixth chord, which if we have a relative minor key, so not all chord progressions start with it in a major chord. So if we take something like that, if we take the D, the G and the A. Now from memory I can remember that fat bottom chord starts on a D. So if I wanted the next chord in that, if I was thinking of the first, the fourth and the fifth, so I'm thinking of either D, G or A. In this case, it's going to the fifth. G, so I'll do that again. So if you have a situation where we couldn't remember the chords to the song, when we know what key it's in, what chords are available, we could work that out, like what I just did there when I couldn't remember as a G as it A. And that also aids with the memory of the song. We take something like I Want It All, which is in the key of the relative key of D major, which is B minor. So the chords that we are using are B minor to A, which is within that key, G, D, G. So we've got the first, the G, back to D, A, G, A, B minor to A, back to B minor. So again, we can see how that is built on the first, the fourth, the fifth, and the relative minor chord. So that's the way we hear songs that can be played with just 4 chords. 9 times out of 10, the first chord to the song indicates the key that we are in, but not always. Again, if we look at something like Sweet Child of Mine, which we looked at the beginning of this video, D, C added 9, G and D. This is actually in the key of G, but starting on the D chord, which is starting on the 5th. So starting on the 5th, going to the 4th, back to the 1st, back to the 5th again. So we can look out for that. If you ever get confused as to this doesn't seem to be, if we went to D and imagine that it was in the key of D and none of the chords seem to fit. We now come to something like guitar solos. How do you memorize a guitar solo? Recently did a video looking at some of the licks and riffs in something like Sultans of Swing. Now if you look at the introduction riff of that, I was a teenager learning that. I viewed that all as individual notes. But if we look at it as a D minor chord, we can see it's almost impossible to forget how to play it if we view it as a D minor chord. If we view it all as individual notes, then it's going to be a little bit more difficult. Viewing it as the D minor chord, we can go away, draw away from having to read it from the guitar tab to be able to memorize it. And we see that with so many different riffs, and like something like Money by Pink Floyd. B minor chord before D even built on that chord. Guitar solo wise, again we looked at I Want to Break Free a week or two ago. If we look at the beginning of that, it's played over an E chord at the beginning. So when we look at the solo for that, so again we're picking the notes, deviate from E, but that is based on an E chord. So even as we go down the string, we land on the G sharp, which is part of the E chord. When it goes to the next little section, again we could view that all as individual notes, or really working through an A chord or an A arpeggio. Deviate, come back and land on E, which is still part of the A chord. So when we're looking at guitar solos, look out for how that fits in with the chord progression that we're playing over the top of. A really good example of that was a few years ago. I remember trying to learn Who Needs You by Queen in the guitar solo on that. Now if you were going to look at the guitar solo and not take any notice of the chord progression you were going to play over and trying to memorize that was going to be really difficult. But as soon as you realised what the chords were that were being played over, the whole thing fit together and became quite easy to be able to remember. One top tip as well, I remember having a guitar student who came with a whole bunch of Metallica guitar tab books, and his problem was that he could play everything in the books, but he was stuck to the book and couldn't play it if the book wasn't in front of him, and it was quite obvious that he wasn't going to be able to play live with the book in front of him, employing somebody to turn the pages. So how can we get past that? What I did with this guy, and he thought that I was going to be able to play all the Metallica songs and magically explain how to memorize them all. All we did was got the book in front of him, take one very small section, play it, cover the rest of the book so you're not looking at the rest of the book, play that one section through, play it again, play it again, play it again, repeat it 10 times, then repeat it 10 times without looking at it, and then you'll find that you know that. Then move on to the next part and do the same thing again. Now the interesting thing is when you're doing guitar lessons with a student, if you ask them, could you play that? They'll play it, they'll play it through. And if you say, can you play it again? Yes, no problem. The third time you ask them, can you repeat that again? They go, oh, okay. And then if you ask them to repeat it a fourth time, they then begin to think that you're being awkward or funny that you've asked them to repeat it again. And this really so lies the problem when learning, that once we get to the third time we've repeated it, we feel like we've done enough. And that's an interesting psychology thing, that 3 always seems to be the number that we feel as if we've done it enough times. If we break past that idea and repeat a small section 10 times, we'll find that we know that without having to look. Then if we go to the next section, repeat that 10 times, then do it 10 times without looking, then piece the two together, we'll find that we know it and we're not even having to look anymore. And that really was a good technique that I've been using, and I think it's been why I've been able to cover such a huge amount of material very quickly, which at one time years ago I just wouldn't have been able to do. So that is a good tip for when practicing on how to get away from the printed sheet and into being able to get it into your head. Because myself, I haven't got a brilliant memory, I've got dyslexia, so it's always used to get things mixed up or the wrong way around, and that's really been a top tip for helping me overcome that. So as always, thank you for watching, and I hope that really helps you be able to memorize any song.